So I want to discuss a recent paper that evaluated a variety of different countries in terms of their adoption of antimicrobials, new antimicrobials. And we're very conscious these days about lists, like who's the top in vaccinations. And as a country, you don't necessarily want to be at the bottom of the list. And what was remarkable to me is I saw that Canada is at the bottom of this list. So can you kind of walk us through the analysis, the study, your findings, and why is this relevant, particularly for Canadian policymakers that are looking to address this innovation gap? What are the takeaways? What can they learn from this?
So it's a paper that a group of us published in Clinical Infectious Diseases that came out last month. We looked at the 7 countries in the G7, plus 7 other high-income countries in Europe. So 14 wealthy countries. And we looked at every new antibiotic that had been approved since January 1 of 2010, so a decade of antibiotic innovation, and either Health Canada, the FDA, European Medicines, or Japan. And there's 18. And then we looked at, most importantly, where have these 18 drugs been commercially launched? This is a distinction because when you get approval in Europe through EMA, you could launch the product in any of the covered countries. But interestingly, companies weren't doing that. They had the ability to launch throughout Europe, but they would only launch in 1 or 2 places. Most notably, the United Kingdom was the first in Europe. And then we ranked out this data. How many commercial launches had there been of really a decade of antibacterial innovation? And as you said, I'm sorry to say Canada came in dead last out of the 14, with 2 out of the 18 have been commercially launched in Canada. Some folks in Australia sent me their data. It was not included in the original study, and Australia, which would be the 15th country, still barely beats out Canada. I think they have 3. So you're probably last out of 15 at this point. Now, this does not mean that these drugs are entirely unavailable in Canada. There's a special access provisions. And I talked to several of the companies who provide their drug through these systems, and some of the Canadians physicians and whatnot, to access them. But there's 2 downsides. One is that process is cumbersome. It takes time, days, in many cases from, here's a patient, dying in our hospital who needs this new antibiotic, and it takes a couple of days to get all the paperwork, and then the thing comes on an airplane. It wouldn't have been great if the drug was sitting in the hospital pharmacy instead of that process. The second problem is that the companies, these are companies that are nearing bankruptcy and being ground into the dust, and there's senior people being asked to respond to emergencies in which they're really not making much money. So it's kind of like asking, the hungry person to cook a meal for you, or I don't know what the right analogy is. And then the third problem is just that by not having the drug in the normal Canadian system, there's no incentive for any drug company to even think about launching their product in Canada. They're not thinking of Canadians, they're not thinking of the Canadian market, because the pricing has been so bad for this class of drugs that no one's, even with this giant border of the United States, they're just not considering it. So I think that's bad for Canada. It's also just bad for global innovation. A wealthy country, all the 14 we studied plus others, really should contribute their fair share, and there's ways to think about that, to the innovation cost. And right now, Canada is effectively not contributing to that because very few of these drugs are commercially available in Canada.
And I look at that as it's ultimately at the end, it's fewer options for Canadian patients. And it's also, we have a responsibility to the world. And sometimes I liken it to climate change, right? Every country has a responsibility. And in this case as well, particularly on innovation, being a large market, we have a responsibility to contribute to that. And thank you for walking us through the implications of just relying on the special access program, because I think it's important for our policymakers here to understand.
Yeah, I mean, I'm grateful for special access programs, but but boy, it shouldn't be the norm. It should be the rare exception, not what you have to do for almost every antibiotic.